Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to the channel. It's Cynicalex, and today we're going to be ranking every single support buff character in Marvel Future Fight. Now, it's a really long list. There's over 50 characters here, so I apologize if I maybe miss one, but I will do my best to not only rank them all, but from best to worst in different categories, but also to mention what their support buff is. So without further ado, let's get into it. We have so many different categories, from godly supports all the way down to very niche, and you all know how it works. We're going to start at the bottom and work our way up. Now, the way that I'm defining a support buff, because this is important to the video, is if the character has a buff that they can use without being in the leadership position and just on the team. Now, you may have to switch to them in the case of one of these characters. So I just included here for nostalgia, it's Daisy Johnson. But otherwise, all of these other characters on the list do not need to be in the leadership position and do not need to be switched to in order to give your team some sort of effect. So yes, some of these support characters have much more value in your eyes because they also have a leadership, and I will consider that a little bit, but I'm mainly focusing on the support buffs just so that it makes sense. It's a support video because we have a leadership video and a leadership tier list, and that one's different, so I don't really want the two to clash too much and to be too similar and sort of confusing. So we're going to start off with very niche buffs. What this basically means is that these buffs apply to 4 characters or less in basically every regard. So I'm having a little bit of trouble finding Cersei, but we have got Gilgamesh and Cersei because their buffs only apply to Eternals. Cersei gives them attack and damage attack and increased damage to heroes and villains, I believe, or increase and decrease damage to villains. And then Gilgamesh gives the Eternals, I think it's defense and guard break immunity. You have Thing and Invisible Woman who give the Fantastic Four some buffs. This is actually the most difficult part of the video. It's going through and finding the characters. You've got the Warriors of the Sky. Shadow Shell gives damage reduction to the Warriors of the Sky, and Sunbird gives a revive, which is one of the coolest support passives if I was just ranking them in terms of their existence, but unfortunately, because it only applies to 4 characters and they're not that strong, it's not that good. Thing gives increased damage to boss types and all attack to the Fantastic Four. And then actually Invisible Woman's buff got nerfed, and she just gives a small guard hit to the Fantastic Four. You've got Jessica Jones and Luke Cage. She gives an amazing heal and damage reduction, and I think mind resistance to the defenders. And then Luke Cage also gives ignore dodge and maybe something else I can't quite remember. Abomination gives all of the Hulk characters, again, it's just like 4 or 5 characters, but he gives them increased damage to villains, I believe, and increased damage to heroes, which is quite nice. And that wraps up the list for very, very niche. So these are just applying to a very, very small group of characters. Once it goes beyond 5, then we'll get into the other buffs and that sort of the category buffs. But now we're going to go on to small buffs. These buffs are just not very big. That's basically the best way to describe them. So Echo, not very big, amazing leadership, but her passive buff for speed types is just ignore dodge and a little bit of damage reduction. It's good, but it's not outstanding. A lot of people talk about how amazing Cyclops is as a leadership, which is true, but his support buff is only up to 30% energy attack. That's not bad. It's very similar to Ghost, which is, I believe, 20% energy attack. But again, in the grand scheme of things, compared to some of these other buffs, it's quite low and quite small. You have Beast, who gives all allies, I believe, guaranteed crit rate and a little bit of crit damage. Katie, I almost forgot about her, gives all allies ignore dodge and crit damage, which is actually really good. But you can't use her in World Boss Legend. We're also considering how many game modes the characters can be used for. Don't worry. Ronan has a very good universal leadership, but he gives all allies ignore dodge, which is pretty not good. It's not very good. Ulysses Claw gives everybody crit damage, which is not bad. I forgot about Mantis, but she gives crit damage and ignore defense, which is good for newer players. Volstagg gives damage reduction, which is pretty cute. Wiccan actually confuses a lot of players because he gives an increase of 1 second to Pierce, but it's not Pierce that you get from cards. It's the Pierce effect from certain debuffs like Bind and Snare. It's not very good. It's very bad. It basically just increases the duration by 1 second. Yeah. And then Iron Hammer, the fusion of Tony and Thor, gives all allies, I believe, 15% energy attack and 15 or 20% lightning damage, which is not bad. It's actually considering, you could actually consider an elemental support. So actually, you know what? I'll put it in the elemental buffs. It's pretty good. We're not going to lie. Now that we're at the elemental buffs, we might as well just do them since you guys know them. Ghost Panther is very good, 50% fire damage for all allies. He's also a non-discriminatory buff. And then he also gives increased damage to villains, which is very, very clutch. The only downside is he can't be used in World Boss Legend. Most of the elemental supports cannot be used in World Boss Legend. You have Ancient One, who gives all allies an increase of elemental damage. So it's just all allies and any element. So it's very, very flexible. The new Enchantress uniform gives all allies mind damage, which is not bad. It's pretty good. Good for Wanda. Storm gives all allies, I believe it's elemental damage as well. So she's quite flexible, 35% elemental, which is nice. Her old uniforms only give lightning damage, so keep that in mind. And then Electro actually comes in and gives all allies 30% lightning damage. So he has a buff for Thor, Beta Ray Bill, etc., which is quite cool. And then we come to the healers. Straightforwardly, they heal you. They activate on hit, so they're not that good. Groot and Venom are generally better healers when they are as strikers, because they drop more heals and they drop them consistently, and they actually drop them faster than they do. But they both have sort of an on-hit healing effect, where when you get hit, you will heal, and then it's got like a 20 or 30 second cooldown. I'm actually going to put Angel in the healers category, even though he's technically not a healer. His buff is to give you, any ally, 30% recovery rate increase. Now that will increase your healing if your character has healing. So it's not really a heal, but it synergizes with healing. So I thought it makes sense to put it here. And if I put him in small buffs, then it creates a... No, it doesn't create a second line. I don't like the second line thing. So anyways, he's there. And then last but not least for the healers, you might have forgotten about her. Weapon Hex. Yeah, she works in PvE and PvP, which is very cool. And she gives you this little bauble. And the bauble heals you when you take damage, sort of like how the auto heal works for characters like Wolverine, etc. I actually just remembered a character that I forgot to put on this list. We'll talk about him at the end. Try to remember who it is. I'll give you 100 sparkle points. We got PvP up next, and these buffs generally are only for PvP, or really just going to increase your defenses, increase your HP, things like that. Wasp, one of the best PvP supports in the game. She gives you a debuff, which is insane, and then she gives you, with this new uniform, 10% HP, which is nice. Colossus, we all know, decreased damage received from both heroes and villains. Easy to counter with Molecule Man, but very, very clutch otherwise. Hela is basically the opposite of Colossus for versus heroes. She increases your damage to heroes and decreases the damage you receive from heroes. Red She-Hulk for PvP gives you damage reduction and HP, which is very nice, and it's all allies, so it's quite flexible. Victorious is basically a worse version of Red She-Hulk. She just gives you the HP, no damage reduction. And then Blue Marvel gives you increase all resistances. It's not that good because right now the meta doesn't have many elemental characters. But if Jean Grey comes back, if other elemental gods come back, it could be a very big problem. And then that 30% increase to all resistances is actually kind of nice. Next up, we have the category buffs. This is a little bit confusing, but basically these characters do not buff everyone. They will only buff a large category of characters. So it makes more sense when you see that I'm putting characters like Nick Fury and Coulson here. They have two of the best buffs in the game, right? Tons of increased damage to villains and super armor, which is insanely good. And then Coulson has increased damage to villains and guaranteed crit rate, insanely good. But that's the catch. They only apply to hero allies. That's great. That's still like 60%, 65% of the characters in the game, but it ignores 35% of the characters in the game. So I wanted to make that distinction. They're not as good as they could be because they ignore one portion of the game, the character base. You have Richard Rider, who gives hero allies increased damage to villains and I believe ignore dodge, which is very nice. You have Green Goblin, who gives villain allies increased damage to heroes and villains. So again, it only affects part of the game here. You have Phyla-Vell, who gives universal types increase attack, I believe. I think it's just increase attack. It might be something else as well, but or skill damage, bonus damage, and then increase to attack. You have Hulkbuster, who gives all technokinetic allies. So it's still pretty niche. You could argue that it's also very niche, but we're going to say that it's not that niche. He gives all technokinetic allies, I believe, HP and attack or something like that. I get his buff honestly confused with War Machine, which is also a technokinetic ally buff, and it's also like attack and HP or something like that. They're both kind of similar. I think they're both HP. And then we have Scarlet Spider, who gives all Spider Sense allies increased damage to villains and heroes, I think. This, again, could arguably be in very niche. It's just that there's more Spider-Verse characters than there are of these categories down here, and it affects, you know, it has the chance to affect more characters. Chances are we're not going to get, I mean, we physically can't get more members of the Fantastic Four. Well, no, we could get more members of the Fantastic Four. Anyways, okay, we're just going to leave him here for now. It's fine. No, we're going to put him down in niche. And then we have Medusa, who gives all Inhumans allies increased damage to supervillains, and I think a decreased damage from supervillains. It's always hard to remember if they do both increase and decrease or just increase. And then we come to the second best category, better supports. So these are just better. They do most of the same things that some of these other good buffs do, but they apply to all allies. Small little change, I forgot that Proxima's passive support only applies to villain allies, just like Green Goblin. So I originally had her slated for the better supports category, but I moved her down to the category buffs because, yes, she only applies to villains. However, these other ones apply to heroes and villains. We've got Taskmaster, we've got Mystique, we've got Shuri, and that's what's really nice about these support type characters. They apply to all allies, so whether you're using a hero, whether you're using a villain, you can just throw them on the team and they will buff them. And then we're going to round out the better buffs with Warwolf. Now, I know this is very surprising, but again, his buff applies to all allies, so it's very good. And he actually has a two-pronged buff. So remember when I mentioned Daisy Johnson as the only character on this list whose only buff you need to switch to her? Well, the reason why I included her, nostalgia, of course. She was the only buff character at one point, but also her buff is very potent. She gives you a 200% damage proc. So you basically switch to Daisy, you press her third skill, she doesn't attack, she just buffs herself, and then you switch to your damage dealer, who carries that buff over, and then you proc. So you can try it in World Boss Ultimate or Squad Battle or other content like that besides World Boss Legend, and she will basically make your damage, she'll double your damage. Like, it's pretty nuts. It's for one attack, and you can do it every like 20 seconds, but it's very good. It's very, very good. Warwolf has Daisy Johnson's, sort of like Daisy Johnson's buff. He has a passive buff, the Howling at the Moon or something, Howling to Mars, and that one will give you like a crazy frenzy buff for 10 seconds or 20 seconds. It's like 80% attack and defense, etc. But his base buff, a lot of people forget, but his base buff is very good. It's 20% guaranteed crit, like Coulson, and then 30% crit damage. That will be very, very good to help characters who need the guaranteed crit rate, but he's just not available for World Boss Legend. So then we come to the final category, godly supports, and these will have a lot of, you know, things in common with other support type characters, but they're just insanely strong because they have additional effects and because they can be used in endgame content. So starting us off here, this is not really ranked first to last, but we have Valkyrie. Not only does she give all allies a crazy increased damage to villains with 50%, but she also gives 30% ignore dodge, and that is so invaluable for tons of different content, and she's also just a solid character on her own. White Fox, although her uniform is paywall, does give a hero allies, it's technically a category buff, but her buffs are just too good to ignore, right? All leadership characters, actually this would be kind of niche. Anywho, all leadership characters get, you know, 65% increased damage to villains, and then all allies get chain hit damage, all attack, and ignore dodge. That's just bonkers. In terms of total buffs, she's actually first in the game. The only reason why she loses some value in my mind is because she has a more narrow window for characters that she can give her full buffs to. She can give some of her buffs to all, I think it's all hero allies, actually, not even all allies, but she only gives the leadership allies, who are also all heroes except for Colossus with the Phoenix Force, 65% increased damage to villains, which is the highest we go in the game right now. So yeah, pretty nuts. Sif also very, very good. All allies are going to get a 45% increased damage dealt to boss types, which is only a PvE type buff, but it's very strong. She also gives all speed, and then she actually has a really good leadership too for combat types, which is a nice little bonus. Ebony Maw, one of the best two-way buffs in the game. Two-way meaning it's really good for PvE because most enemies are universal, and then it's really good for PvP because most enemies are universal. Sentry, Null, Doctor Doom, you know, Blue Marvel, Hela, there's just so many over the years, Jean Grey, etc., that have all just been universal schmoes. Then we have Black Cat, the only other tier 2, there's one more, on the godly support, and she just has way too many supports, right? Villain allies have these crazy buffs from her leadership, but then what's more important is now her passive applies to the allies, and then her artifact also applies to all allies, which is just very, very strong for dispatch, dimension rifts, you know, squad battle, ABX, etc. She just has really bonkers buffs, and I just cannot wait to use her in World Boss Legend when it's available. And then we have Wave and Dazzler. Wave has a pretty generic hero buff, so she would be in the category buff, but I'm also considering her leadership, which is all allies increasing attack. That's a really clutch bonus to have there. She's like on the cusp of godly support, but yeah. And then we also have Dazzler. Now the thing with Dazzler, yeah, I know she's tier 2, but I promise you, the day of the mutants will come. Maybe not this year. Maybe I was wrong last year when I said that this year would be the year of the mutants, but whenever it's the year of the mutants, we will know, because Dazzler will get a tier 3 or Transcendence. Her buffs are disgusting. She gives ignore dodge to mutant allies, of course. She gives ignore dodge, and she gives like 60% increased damage to boss types. So she basically combines sort of like Valkyrie and Sif's buffs. It's really bonkers. And I remember when, and you can ask veterans, when she came out, she cranked Cable's damage so much. That was when we first started one-shotting Galactus because of Dazzler's buffs. Before that, we couldn't one-shot Galactus. So yeah, I'm sort of putting her here as a legacy pick. You should argue that she should be somewhere else. So just keep that in mind. Wave and Dazzler are not really supposed to be up here. But otherwise, yeah, this is how the list pans out. I'm really happy with this list. It's my personal list. You're welcome to disagree with me. You're welcome to make your own list. I can leave a link down below to the list if you want to just play around with it yourself as well. Hit me up in the comments down below. Let me know what you think of my list. Smash the like button to keep more content coming to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.